The lawyer cleared his throat, looked straight at me, and said words I never imagined hearing in the same breath as my daddy's name. Mr. Leonard James Whitmore's last will and testament leaves the family residence at 214 Magnolia Circle, all savings accounts, life insurance proceeds, and the remaining acreage to his wife, Mrs. Dolores Ann Whitmore, and their children, Leonard James Whitmore, Jr., age 31, and Jasmine Marie Whitmore, age 28. I was sitting in a leather chair that smelled like old money and new grief, wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to Daddy's funeral 6 days earlier. The air conditioner hummed too loud. My cousin Denise squeezed my hand so hard I felt my bones shift. Because I was the only person in that room who didn't already know Dolores and Whitmore existed. My name is Camille Renee Whitmore. Folks call me Cammy. I'm 45 years old, a nursing supervisor at Mercy General, and for as long as I can remember I was Leonard James Whitmore's only child. His baby girl. The one who sat on his knee while he taught me to read the funny papers. The one who held his hand when the cancer ate him down to skin and stubborn pride. The one who spoon-fed him peach ice cream when the chemo stole his taste for everything else and promised him, voice steady, "I got you, Daddy. Always got you." And in return, he left me the debts. Medical bills. Credit cards I never knew about. A second mortgage on the house I grew up in that I also never knew about. The lawyer slid a neat little folder across the polished table like he was serving coffee. Inside were numbers that made my chest cave in. Denise had to catch me before my knees hit the carpet. Across the room sat a woman I'd never seen before, petite, honey-brown skin, hair in a perfect bun, wearing a black suit that cost more than my monthly salary. 2 younger people flanked her, a man with Daddy's nose and a woman with his eyes. They didn't look at me. Not once. The lawyer kept talking, probate dates, executor duties, personal effects, but the words floated somewhere above my head like smoke. All I could hear was Daddy's voice from 2 weeks ago, thin and raspy, reaching for my hand in that hospital bed. "Take care of the house, baby. It's yours. Everything I got left is yours." I believed him. I bathed him. I changed him. I slept in the vinyl recliner beside his bed for 93 nights straight so he wouldn't be alone when the pain got bad. I held the bucket when the morphine made him sick. I sang His Eye is on the Sparrow off key because it was the only song that ever calmed him. And while I was singing, Dolores Ann Whitmore was cashing checks with his name on them. The reading ended. People stood. Chairs scraped. Somebody's perfume smelled like gardenias and money. The woman, Dolores, finally looked at me. Her eyes were soft, almost kind, but her mouth stayed flat. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said, voice low, practiced. "Leonard loved you very much." Then she took her children, my brother and sister I never knew I had, and walked out like she belonged there. I stood in that office until the secretary turned off the lights and asked if I needed help finding the door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because every memory I had of being Daddy's girl had just turned into a lie wearing his face. And the worst part, the very worst part, when I walked out to the parking lot, Denise still holding me up, I looked down at my phone and saw a text from an unknown number timestamped that morning, the day of the reading. It was a photo of Daddy's house. My house. The front porch I painted robin's egg blue last spring. Only now there was a bright red sold sign staked in the yard like a dagger. Underneath, 3 words. "Welcome to nothing." I didn't know it then, but that was Dolores's oldest son, Leonard Jr., letting me know the new family had already started moving in. I drove to the cemetery in a daze, sat on the fresh dirt still mounded over Daddy's grave, and asked him out loud the only question that mattered. Why wasn't I enough? The wind moved through the magnolias and didn't answer. But I wasn't finished asking. Not by a long shot. People always said Daddy and I looked carved from the same piece of oak, same wide smile, same stubborn chin, same way of tilting our heads when we listened. I grew up believing the sun rose because Leonard James Whitmore told it to. We lived in the white clapboard house on Magnolia Circle with the wraparound porch and the pecan tree so old it remembered slavery. Mema died when I was 7, breast cancer, quick and cruel, so it was just the two of us against the world. He worked construction, then started his own small company, Whitmore and Sons, even though there was never a son. Just me in steel-toe boots and pigtails, handing him nails while he taught me how to square a foundation. Every morning he made grits with too much butter and told me I could be anything. Every night he checked under my bed for monsters and promised none would ever get past him. When I left for nursing school, he cried harder than I did. When I graduated, he wore his only suit and clapped so loud the dean laughed. When I bought my little condo downtown, he hung the curtains himself and said, "You always got a room at home, baby girl. Don't you ever forget." The last 5 years were harder. Daddy was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 71. The kind doctors talk about in hushed voices. He fought like a man who still had promises to keep. Chemo, radiation, clinical trials in Atlanta. I took family leave, moved back into my old bedroom with the faded butterfly wallpaper, and became his nurse, his daughter, his everything. We had routines that kept us sane. Mornings, I'd warm his socks in the dryer because the chemo made him cold. He'd shuffle to the kitchen in his robe, sit at the same spot by the window, and watch the birds while I made oatmeal soft enough for his mouth sores. Afternoons, sponge baths, pain meds, old westerns on the little TV in his room. He'd hold my hand and say, "You're the best thing I ever built, Cammy girl." Evenings, I'd read him the newspaper or the Psalms, whichever he asked for. Sometimes he'd doze off mid-sentence and I'd just sit there listening to him breathe, counting everyone like coins in a jar. He never talked about dying. He talked about living. Fix that loose board on the porch before somebody falls. Make sure the fig tree gets water this summer. Take care of my house, baby. It's paid for. Everything I got is yours. I wrote it all down in the little notebook I kept in my scrubs pocket, the way nurses do. I believed every word. He had good days when he'd sit on the porch in his wheelchair, waving at neighbors, telling them his daughter was the prettiest nurse in Georgia. Bad days when the pain folded him in half and he'd whisper, "I'm sorry, baby, I'm so tired." I'd crawl into bed beside him like I was 7 again and rub his back until the morphine pulled him under. The night before he slipped away, he was lucid for the first time in weeks. Moonlight came through the curtains and painted silver on his cheekbones. He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "Promise me you'll be all right," he said. "I promise, Daddy. Promise me you'll keep the house in the family. I promise." He smiled then, the same smile from every childhood photo, and said, "That's my girl." He died at 4:08 a.m. while I held him. I didn't sleep for 3 days planning the funeral. Picked his favorite blue suit. Chose the casket with the softest lining. Ordered magnolia wreaths because they were Mama's flower. The church was packed, men he'd worked with for 40 years, nurses who'd cared for him, neighbors who brought casseroles for weeks. I stood at the podium and told them Daddy taught me love is a verb, and I felt proud and broken all at once. After the burial, I went back to the house and sat in his recliner that still smelled like Old Spice and hospital soap. I cried until there was nothing left but hiccups. Then I started cleaning, because that's what you do when the world ends. You wash dishes. You sweep floors. You pretend order can glue a heart back together. I never noticed the locked file cabinet in his office. I never noticed the second cell phone in the nightstand drawer that only rang when I was at the hospital working extra shifts. I never noticed the withdrawals from the business account labeled DW support. I was too busy keeping promises to a dying man. I was too busy being the good daughter. And while I was being good, Delores and Whitmore was being his wife. I just didn't know it yet. But the ground was already shifting under the house I thought was mine. The first crack appeared 3 weeks after the funeral, on a Tuesday that smelled like rain coming. I was sorting mail at the kitchen table, bills, sympathy cards, junk flyers, when I found an envelope addressed to Daddy in neat, feminine handwriting. No return address, just a postmark from Macon, 2 hours away. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper. Leonard. The kids asked about their daddy again. I told them he's watching from heaven now. Junior wants to know if heaven has a hardware store so you can still build things. We miss you every day. Love always, D. At the bottom was a tiny lipstick kiss in soft coral. I stared at it so long the paper trembled in my hand. D could be anybody. Old friend. Cousin. Church sister. I told myself that even as my stomach knotted. I set it aside, face down, and kept sorting. But the knot stayed. A few days later I was paying bills online, Daddy's login still worked, thank God, and noticed a checking account I'd never seen. Whitmore Personal Number 2. Balance, $187.43. Last transaction, automatic transfer to DW support for $3,200, dated the day before he died. I called the bank, heart thumping so loud I barely heard the teller. Yes, that account was opened in 1992. Joint with Mr. Whitmore and a Mrs. Delories and Whitmore. The room tilted. I gripped the counter. Could you repeat that name? She did. Slowly. Kindly. Like she knew she was breaking something. I hung up and stood in Daddy's office, my office now, I thought, staring at the locked file cabinet I'd been avoiding. The key was on his old key ring, mixed in with the house key and the faded rabbit's foot he'd carried since Vietnam. My hands shook so hard it took 3 tries to fit the key in the lock. Inside were 30 years of secrets, neat as church bulletins. Bank statements showing monthly transfers, never less than $2,000, sometimes $4,000. A marriage license dated 1991, 1 year before I graduated high school. Leonard James Whitmore and Delories and Franklin, both smiling like the future was bright. Birth certificates, Leonard James Whitmore, Jr., born 1994. Jasmine Marie Whitmore, born 1997. Father listed, Leonard James Whitmore. School photos tucked in envelopes, little boy with daddy's ears, little girl with his dimples. And at the very bottom, a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, every one starting my dearest Leonard and ending your loving wife, Delories. I sat on the floor among the papers and felt the house breathe around me like it had been holding this secret in its walls the whole time. Daddy had never missed a weekend with me. Never missed a birthday, a graduation, a Christmas morning. He'd coached my softball team, met me for lunch when I worked night shift, sat in the ER with me when I broke my wrist at 29. How does a man live 2 lives that perfectly for 30 years? I didn't sleep that night. I spread the papers across the dining room table and stared until the words blurred. Part of me wanted to burn it all. Pretend I'd never seen it. Keep the daddy I knew, the one who called me his princess, safe inside my heart. But another part, the nurse who reads charts and finds the lie before the doctor does, needed to know how deep this went. So I started digging. Quiet. Methodical. The way you turn a patient every 2 hours to prevent bedsores, small moves that save a life. I called the courthouse in Macon. Confirmed the marriage was real. I searched the kids on Facebook, private profiles, but their cousin's page had pictures, daddy at a cookout 5 years ago, arm around a teenage boy who looked just like him at that age. I found Delories's LinkedIn, paralegal at a small firm, profile photo professional and smiling. Every click felt like swallowing glass. The hardest was finding the life insurance policy change form, dated 2 years ago when Daddy's cancer came back. Beneficiary switched from Camille Renee Whitmore, daughter, to Delories and Whitmore, spouse. His signature at the bottom looked shaky, but it was his. I sat in the dark with that paper in my lap and cried without sound until my ribs ached. Because the man who taught me honesty was a lie. The man who said family first had 2 of them. The man who promised me the house had already given it away. I wish I could say I handled it with grace from the start. I didn't. I called his oldest friend, Mr. Raymond, who'd known him since Korea. Asked point blank if he knew. There was a long silence, then a sigh that carried 60 years of loyalty. Cammy, your daddy loved you something fierce. But Delories, she was from before. He never meant for you to get hurt. I hung up before he finished. For 2 weeks I walked around like a ghost in my own life. Went to work, smiled at patients, came home and sat in Daddy's recliner staring at the wall. Denise tried to get me to eat. My supervisor put me on light duty because I kept mixing up meds. I was drowning in a grief no casserole could touch. Then one morning I woke up angry. Not loud angry. Quiet angry. The kind that gets things done. Because Daddy might have lied about everything else, but he taught me one truth I still had. Whitmores don't stay down. So I made coffee, put on my good earrings, and started making phone calls. First to an estate attorney Denise's cousin knew. Then to a private investigator who owed me a favor from a hospital fraud case. Then to the funeral home, because something about the way Dolores's family sat in the family section had been itching at me. I was going to find out exactly what I'd been left with. And exactly what had been taken. Because secrets don't stay buried when somebody starts digging with both hands. And I had 30 years of love to turn into questions nobody wanted to answer. The private investigator's name was Marcus Tate, quiet man, ex-cop, voice like warm gravel. He sat across from me at my kitchen table with a plain manila folder and a look that said he'd seen every kind of ugly the world keeps in its back pocket. "Miss Camille," he started, gentle as a funeral usher, "you sure you want all of this?" I poured him coffee I wasn't drinking myself and slid the sugar closer. "I've been living half of it for 45 years, Mr. Tate. I'd like the other half now." He nodded once and opened the folder. The first page was a photograph taken outside a modest brick ranch in Macon 2 weeks after Daddy's funeral. Dolores on the porch in sunglasses, arms around Leonard Jr. and Jasmine. Behind them, movers carried boxes labeled Kitchen, LW. Next page, marriage certificate, wedding photo, Daddy in a light gray suit, Dolores in a simple lace dress, both smiling like they'd won something the world didn't understand. Then the real knife. A second will, dated 3 months before Daddy died, naming Dolores executrix and primary beneficiary. Signature looked like his, but the witness signatures were Dolores's sister and her best friend from high school. Notary stamp from the law firm where Dolores had worked for 22 years. Marcus laid a handwriting analysis on top, independent lab, not cheap. Signature on the new will is close, but pressure patterns are off. The L in Leonard loops different. Lab says 87% likelihood of tracing or guided hand. I stared until the letters swam. Daddy's last 3 months he could barely hold a spoon. I fed him. I signed his name on consent forms because his hand shook too bad. Somebody put a pen in that shaking hand and made him give away my birthright. I felt the room tilt again, but this time I didn't fall. Marcus kept going. Bank records showing Dolores had power of attorney filed 6 weeks before he died, while I was at the hospital working a double so I could pay for the new clinical trial. Life insurance change of beneficiary form, same shaky signature, same 2 witnesses. Quit claim deed transferring the Magnolia Circle house to Leonard and Dolores Whitmore, joint tenants with right of survivorship, dated the same week. Every document neat. Legal. Bulletproof on the surface. And everyone done while I was wiping his brow, reading him psalms, believing I was the only person he trusted with his ending. Marcus closed the folder. "I'm sorry, I truly am." I looked at him for a long minute, then at the family photo still hanging over the fireplace, Daddy and me at my nursing graduation, his arm proud around my shoulders. "Mr. Tate," I said, voice steady for the first time in weeks, "sorry doesn't live here anymore." "Truth does. How much to keep digging?" He quoted a price. I wrote the check without blinking. 2 days later I drove to Macon. I told myself I just wanted to see the house. Needed to see where Daddy had spent the nights. He told me he was at the fishing cabin with the boys. But really I needed to look Dolores in the eye and see what kind of woman lives a lie for 30 years and still sleeps at night. Their street was quiet, azaleas blooming like nothing was wrong. The brick ranch was smaller than our house but newer, with a tidy lawn and a swing on the porch. I parked across the street and waited. She came out at 4:30 carrying grocery bags, youngest son helping. Jasmine followed with a cheer bag, still in high school uniform. They looked normal. Happy. Like any other family coming home from a regular day. I got out of the car. Deloise saw me first. Froze halfway up the walk. The grocery bag slipped, apples rolling across the grass. "Miss Camille," she said, soft, like we'd met before. Leonard Jr. stepped in front of his mother, protective. Jasmine's eyes went wide. I walked closer, slow, hands open so they could see I wasn't carrying anything but 45 years of questions. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said. "I just need 5 minutes." Deloise nodded once. Told the kids to take the groceries inside. We stood on her porch in the late afternoon heat, cicadas screaming in the trees. "How long?" I asked. She didn't pretend not to understand. "Since before you were born," she said, voice steady but tired. "We met when he was stationed at Fort Gordon. I got pregnant with Junior right after he went home to marry your mama. He never left us, Camille." "Not really. Just lived in 2 places." I felt the words hit like fists. "He told me y'all separated after Jasmine was born," she continued. "That he was filing papers. I believed him for a long time. Then I stopped asking. And the will?" My voice cracked on the last word. She looked down at her hands. "He was so sick. Kept saying he'd fix it, make it right for everybody. I sat with him one night when you were at work. He could barely talk. I held the pen. Told him it was the only way the kids would be safe. He cried. Said he was sorry. Then he signed. I closed my eyes and saw Daddy's face that night, fever bright, whispering my name like a prayer. You forged his last wish. I protected my children," she corrected, soft but firm. "Same as you would've." We stood there while the sun slipped lower and painted everything orange. "I loved him," she said finally. "Not the way you think. But I did." I believed her. And that made it worse. I drove home with the windows down and gospel music loud enough to rattle my teeth. When I walked into the Magnolia house, my house, still mine until the court said different, I went straight to Daddy's bedroom, opened the nightstand, and found the second phone I'd missed before. It was still charged. Passcode his birthday. Hundreds of texts to Deloise. Photos of the kids' birthdays, school plays, graduations. Voice memos of him telling them bedtime stories from 2 hours away. One video from last Christmas, him in the hospital bed, weak, telling Jasmine, "Daddy's proud of you, baby girl," while I slept in the recliner 6 feet away. I sat on his bed and played it on loop until the battery died. Then I called the attorney and said the words I never thought I'd say. Contest it. Everything. I want my daddy's real voice heard, even if it's just me doing the talking. Because some betrayals you don't survive by staying quiet. You survive by making the truth louder than the lie ever was. The day I decided to fight, I woke up before the sun and did something I hadn't done since Daddy's funeral. I put on a full face of makeup, the red lipstick he always said made me look like a movie star, and I drove to the courthouse to file the contest myself. I wasn't leaving it to chance or to some junior associate who'd never spoon-fed a dying man peach ice cream. The clerk took one look at my face and stamped the papers without small talk. Back home I turned Daddy's office into a war room. Whiteboards on the walls. Timelines in different colored markers. Every bank statement, medical record, and text message printed and tabbed like a patient chart. Marcus Tate brought me a box of new discoveries every Friday like it was Christmas in hell. Hospital visitation logs showing Deloise had signed in as wife on nights I thought I was the only visitor. A safe deposit box key hidden in Daddy's old work boots. Inside were the original 1989 will naming me sole heir and a handwritten letter dated 2015 that said, "If anything happens to me, everything goes to my daughter Camille. She's the only one who never asked for anything." That letter was in Daddy's real handwriting, strong loops, Heavy pressure, no tremor. I cried over it on the kitchen floor until Denise found me and made me eat a bowl of chicken soup I didn't taste. We built the case like a nursing care plan, step by step, no shortcuts. Undue influence. Dolores had power of attorney while Daddy was heavily medicated. Lack of capacity. Medical records showed he was on high-dose opioids and steroids the week the new will was signed. Forgery probability. 3 separate handwriting experts now said 91 to 94% chance the signature was traced or guided. Fraudulent concealment. The second family had never been disclosed to me, the named executor in every prior will. I paid for it by picking up every overtime shift the hospital would give me, selling Mama's good china on Facebook Marketplace, and taking out a second mortgage on my condo, the one place that was still truly mine. Some nights I'd fall asleep at the table with highlighter on my cheek and wake up to Denise covering me with a blanket. "You don't have to do this alone, Cammy." "I'm not," I told her. "I'm doing it with the daddy I thought I had. He's in every page." The hardest call was to Leonard Jr. and Jasmine. I found their numbers in Daddy's second phone. I didn't know what I expected, anger, maybe silence. Instead Jasmine answered on the second ring, voice small. "Is this Camille?" I swallowed everything I wanted to scream and said, "Yes, baby. It's me." She cried. Not angry tears. Lost little girl tears. "Mama said you hate us." "I don't hate you," I said, and it was true the moment I said it. "I hate what was done. Not who you are." We talked for an hour. She told me about the daddy who showed up for every honors ceremony, who taught her to drive in an empty church parking lot, who kept her childhood artwork in a box under his bed at Magnolia Circle. I told her about the daddy who sat through every one of my nursing school clinicals with a thermos of coffee and a proud grin. 2 different men. Same heartbeat. I asked if they'd be willing to give deposition testimony about their mother guiding Daddy's hand. There was a long silence. "We have to talk to Mama," she whispered. I understood. Blood is thick, even when it's half yours and half a lie. 3 days later Leonard Jr. texted me a single line. "We'll tell the truth." He would have wanted that. I sat in the parking lot at work and cried so hard my mascara ran into my scrubs. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in October, neutral territory, grey conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and anxiety. Dolores walked in with her lawyer, tall, pinstriped, voice like expensive ice. Leonard Jr. and Jasmine followed, eyes on the floor. I walked in with Marcus Tate, my attorney Ms. Regina Holt, 5'0" in 4-inch heels and the calm of a woman who'd never lost a will contest, and a banker's box full of truth. We sat across from each other like 2 sides of the same broken mirror. Dolores spoke first, voice soft, practiced. "Camille, we don't have to do this. Leonard loved you. We can settle. You keep the house. We split the insurance. Nobody drags this through court." I looked at her for a long minute. "You sat beside his bed while I worked doubles to pay for medicine you never helped buy. You held his hand when he couldn't hold a pen and called it protection. You don't get to offer me scraps from my own table." Then I opened the box and started laying documents down like cards. Original will. Handwriting reports. Medical records with morphine doses circled in red. The safe deposit letter in Daddy's real voice. Hospital logs. Text messages where Dolores told the kids, "Don't worry, I took care of everything." I didn't raise my voice once. When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking like a heartbeat. Dolores's lawyer tried to object, relevance, chain of custody, privilege. Ms. Holt shut him down with a smile sharp enough to shave with. Then Leonard Jr. spoke. "My mama asked us to say Daddy wanted this. But he didn't. He cried the night she made him sign. Said he was failing Camille." Jasmine was crying too hard to talk, but she nodded. Dolores's face folded in on itself, not anger, defeat. The mediator cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a clear path forward. Fraudulent procurement is a slam dunk. I recommend settlement before this hits open court. Numbers were discussed. I didn't flinch. They kept the cash value of the life insurance, money Daddy had paid into for the other children's education. I kept the house, the land, the business accounts, and the truth. Dolores signed with a pen that shook worse than Daddy's ever did. When it was over, she stood. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time her voice cracked. "I thought I was saving my babies." "I know," I told her. "That's why I'm not taking everything. Just what was always mine." We walked out into October sunshine that felt like mercy. I didn't look back. But I did stop at the cemetery on the way home, laid a single magnolia bloom on Daddy's grave, and said the words I'd been carrying for months. "I kept my promise, Daddy. The house is still in the family. Yours and mine." The wind moved through the trees like an answer. Word travels fast in a small Georgia town, but truth moves like wildfire when you give it dry grass and a breeze. The first spark was the front page story in the County Gazette 2 weeks after mediation. Local contractors double life exposed in bitter will contest, daughter prevails. They ran Daddy's obituary photo beside the courthouse steps, picture of me walking out with Ms. Holt. Underneath, a smaller shot of Dolores leaving through a side door, sunglasses on, head down. By Sunday, every church pew from here to Macon had read it with their coffee. I didn't plant the story. I didn't have to. Reporters smell blood in the water same as anybody else, and Ms. Holt is very good at no comment that somehow still says everything. After that, the tide turned quick. The men Daddy had worked with for 40 years, men who'd called him brother, stopped speaking when Dolores came to the hardware store. The cashier at Piggly Wiggly rang her up in silence and didn't ask about her mama like she used to. The pastor at First Baptist, where Dolores had sung in the choir for 20 years, asked her to step down from the soprano section until things settle. It wasn't loud. Southern folks rarely are. But it was complete. Leonard Jr. lost his job at the county public works garage. Nobody fired him outright. They just kept assigning him the routes nobody wanted until he quit. Jasmine's cheer coach moved her to the back row, then off the squad altogether when parents started pulling their daughters from stunts for safety reasons. Dolores's paralegal firm let her go due to restructuring. Translation: clients didn't want the woman who forged a dying man's will handling their closing documents. I never asked for any of it. I was too busy trying to breathe through court dates and grief counseling and learning how to sleep in a house that now echoed with 2 families. But the town chose. At Daddy's old VFW post, they took his name off the memorial brick they'd laid when he retired. Replaced it with a new one that just read in memory of the man we thought we knew. The hardware store put up a little plaque by the register, Whitmore and Sons, founded 1978 by Leonard Whitmore and carried on by his daughter Camille. They sent me a photo. I cried in the break room at work. The hardest moment came the first Sunday I went back to Mount Zion after everything went public. I walked in wearing my navy hat with the little veil, Mama's funeral hat, because I wasn't ready for all the eyes. The usher, Miss Loretta, who'd known me since baptism, took my hand and led me straight down the center aisle to the third pew where Whitmore's had sat since 1952. Dolores was already there, 2 rows ahead, shoulders stiff. The congregation stood for the opening hymn. I felt every stare like heat on my skin. Then Sister Clara, 92 years old, voice still strong enough to crack pews, started us off on Blessed Assurance. And one by one, people reached over the pews to touch my shoulder, squeeze my hand, pat my back. Not pity. Solidarity. By the second verse the whole church was swaying, and I was crying so hard I couldn't see the hymnal. Miss Loretta just held it for both of us and sang my part loud enough to cover me. When offering time came, the deacon walked straight past Dolores's row and put the plate in my hands first. Message received. After service, Dolores waited by the door like she had something to say. People flowed around her like water around a rock. She looked smaller than she had in that grey conference room. "I'm moving," she said quietly. "Taking the kids to Atlanta. Fresh start." I nodded once. I never wanted you hurt, Camille. I know, I said. And I did. But wanting and doing are two different things. She started to reach for me, then thought better and let her hand fall. Tell your daddy I'm sorry, she whispered. If you ever talk to him again. I watched her walk to her car, an older model now, no Cadillac, with Leonard Jr. holding the door for her like a gentleman in a house that was falling down. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. But I also felt seen. For the first time since the lawyer opened that folder, the town saw me, the daughter who bathed her daddy, who kept every promise, who refused to let a lie be the last word. And they stood with me. Some consequences you don't have to hand out. People do it for you when love and loyalty finally pick the same side. By Christmas, Dolores's house in Macon was on the market. By spring, it was sold. I never heard from them again. And the pew at Mount Zion stayed warm every Sunday, because somebody was always waiting to sit beside me. Spring came gentle that year, like it knew we'd all been bruised. The magnolia in the front yard bloomed so heavy the branches bowed, and every morning I woke to petals scattered across the porch like the house itself was letting go of old weight. I turned 46 in April, and for the first time in my life I didn't dread another trip around the sun. The legal fight was over. The judge's order sat framed on my dresser, the 2024 will vacated, the 2015 will, Daddy's real one, reinstated, the house and land and remaining accounts mine free and clear. Dolores kept the insurance money she'd already spent on the kids' college, and we called it even. The gavel fell quiet, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I started small. I painted the living room the soft sage murmur always wanted but Daddy said was too girly. I hung new curtains that let the light in instead of keeping it out. I turned the spare bedroom, the one Dolores's children had never slept in, into a guest room with a quilt my auntie pieced from Daddy's old work shirts. Every square held a memory I could touch without bleeding. The hardest day was clearing Daddy's closet. I waited until a Saturday in May when the air smelled like cut grass and possibility. Denise came over with sweet tea and patience. We took every shirt, every pair of suspenders, every worn-out belt, and laid them on the bed like a map of the man we thought we knew. I found the letter in the pocket of his Sunday suit. One sheet of notebook paper, folded small, in his real handwriting, strong, no tremor. Cammy girl. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you know everything. I'm sorry, don't cover it. I was a coward who loved too many people and hurt the one who mattered most. The house is yours. Always was. Don't let nobody tell you different. Live in it loud. Love in it loud. Fill it with babies and laughter and Sunday dinners. Forgive me if you can. If you can't, live so good it don't matter. I'm proud of you every day I got breath and every day I don't. Your daddy. Leonard. I sat on the floor and cried until Denise thought she'd have to call the paramedics. Then I folded the letter, put it in the locket Mama used to wear, and hung it around my neck where it belonged. Some apologies come too late to fix anything. But they can still start the healing. Summer brought new routines. I went back to running, slow at first, just to the mailbox and back, until I could do 3 miles without stopping. I started cooking again, big pots of greens and cornbread that filled the house with smells Daddy loved. I opened the porch swing to neighbors and let the kids from down the street play in the yard like I used to. And I said yes to coffee with Calvin Reed. Calvin is the pharmacist at Mercy General, quiet, kind eyes, hands that know how to gentle when they hand you pills or a cup of coffee. He'd been asking me to lunch for a year, always respectful, never pushing. After the judge's ruling, he left a single magnolia bloom on my workstation with a note, "Whenever you're ready, Miss Cammy." I was ready in June. We started slow, coffee, then dinner, then Sunday drives with the windows down and gospel on the radio. He never asked about the court case unless I brought it up. He just showed up with peach cobbler and good conversation until one night on the porch swing he reached for my hand and I let him keep it. By fall we were talking about rings, nothing big, just something simple that said I choose this. The kids at church started calling him Mr. Calvin, and it sounded right in the house. Thanksgiving was the real turning point. I invited everybody who'd carried me, Denise and her family, Ms. Holt, Marcus Tate, even Miss Loretta from church who's 93 and still drives herself. 23 people around folding tables that stretched from the dining room to the foyer. The house smelled like turkey and macaroni and laughter so loud the windows shook. Calvin carved the bird. Denise's husband said grace. And when we went around the table saying what we were thankful for, I stood up with Daddy's letter in my pocket and tears in my eyes. I'm thankful for a daddy who messed up big but loved me bigger. I'm thankful for truth that hurt but finally set me free. And I'm thankful for every one of you who sat in the fire with me until I could walk out the other side. Miss Loretta raised her glass of sweet tea and said, to Cammie Whitmore, who kept her promise and kept her daddy's house in the family. Everybody said amen like it was church. That night I stood on the porch after the last car left and looked at the magnolia tree lit silver by the moon. Calvin came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. You did good, baby, he whispered. No, I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. We did good. The next spring I planted a new pecan tree in the backyard, small now, but it'll shade grandchildren one day. I hung a swing from the strongest branch and named it Daddy's Second Chance. Some nights I sit out there with Calvin and a glass of wine and listen to the leaves rustle like apologies finally settled into peace. I never heard from Delores or the children again. I hope they found their own porch swing somewhere. I hope they learned what I did. Secrets weigh more than truth ever will. And me. I'm still head nurse on the med-surg floor. Still run 3 miles every morning. Still cook enough on Sunday to feed half the neighborhood. The house on Magnolia Circle is paid for, porch painted fresh every year, and the door is always open to anybody who needs a plate or a prayer. I wear Mama's locket every day. Inside is Daddy's letter and a new picture, me and Calvin at the county fair, both of us laughing like children. Some legacies you inherit. Some you rebuild, board by board, laugh by laugh, until the house stands stronger than it ever did before. And every time the wind moves through those magnolia blooms, I swear I hear Daddy's voice on Sunday mornings when I was little. That's my girl. Only now I answer back, out loud, so the trees can hear. That's right, Daddy. Still Come on up here with me, sugar, the swing's big enough for 2, and the tea's still sweet. If you've stayed through every tear, every courthouse step, every night I sat on that bedroom floor wondering how a heart keeps beating when it's cracked clean in 2, then you already know this story isn't really about a house or money or even a daddy's double life. It's about what happens when the person who taught you your worth turns around and acts like you never had any. And it's about what happens when you decide your worth isn't up for debate. I've had so many of y'all slide into my messages after the other stories, some crying in parking lots, some angry enough to cuss a blue streak, some just whispering, Miss Cammie, that was my daddy too. And every time I read one, I go right back to that grey conference room where I laid truth on the table like a winning hand and realized I wasn't playing for revenge. I was playing for the little girl who used to fall asleep on her daddy's chest listening to his heartbeat, believing it would never lie to her. So let me say it plain, the way Mama would have over coffee at this very table. Your daddy might have failed you. Your mama might have failed you. The people who were supposed to choose you first might have chosen somebody else. But their failure is not the period at the end of your sentence. It's just a comma. And you get to decide what comes next. Some of you asked, Miss Cammie, do you hate him? No, baby. Hate takes up too much room in a heart that's already learning how to love itself again. I missed the daddy I thought I had every single day. But I made peace with the daddy who actually existed, the one who loved me fierce and flawed, who built me up with one hand and tore me down with the other. I forgave him on a Tuesday in July when I was hanging new curtains and the sun hit the magnolia just right and I felt him standing behind me saying, that's my girl. Forgiveness didn't make what he did okay. It just stopped letting what he did keep hurting me every morning when I woke up. Some of you asked about Delores and the children. I don't know where they are tonight. I pray for them the quick prayer I pray for hard things. Lord, let them find peace that doesn't cost somebody else their birthright. That's between them and the God who still sees them. My job is to keep my own side of the street clean. And some of you, the ones whose messages make me pull my car over because I'm crying too hard to drive, ask the question that hurts the deepest. Miss Cammy, how did you keep from becoming bitter? I almost didn't. There were days I wanted to burn every memory that smelled like him. There were nights I screamed into pillows so the neighbors wouldn't hear. But bitterness is a seed that only grows when you keep watering it with attention. So I planted something else instead. I planted Sunday dinners loud enough to rattle the windows. I planted a pecan tree for grandchildren I hope to meet one day. I planted love with a man who looks at me like I hung the moon and never once asked me to be smaller so he could feel taller. And every time that old bitterness tried to sprout, I drowned it with laughter and collard greens and children running through my sprinklers shouting, Miss Cammy, watch me, because the best revenge against anybody who ever made you feel less is to live so full they run out of room to fit in your thoughts. So if you're sitting there tonight holding a daddy-shaped hole in your chest, if somebody left you out of the will, out of the story, out of the love you were sure was yours, if you're wondering whether you'll ever feel whole again, come sit on this swing with me. Leave that heavy thing right here on these boards. I've got room, and the tea's still sweet, and the magnolia petals fall soft enough to catch every tear you didn't know you were still carrying. You don't have to forgive today. You don't have to fix it today. You just have to keep breathing until one morning you wake up and the hole is a little smaller and the sun is a little brighter and you realize you're still here. Still standing. Still worthy. Still somebody's answered prayer, even if it's just your own. And when you're ready, you take the next right step. Maybe it's a lawyer. Maybe it's a prayer. Maybe it's just buying a new curtain and letting the light in. Whatever it is, do it knowing the little girl they tried to erase grew up to be a woman who decides her own ending. Now I'm gonna ask you the same question I ask at the end of every story, because I read every single answer and carry them in my heart like you'll carry mine. If this had been your daddy, if you'd been the only one left out while everybody else got the pieces, if you'd had to fight for the love you thought was already yours, would you have done what I did? Would you have fought quiet and fierce until the truth won? Or would you have walked away to keep the peace? There's no wrong answer, darling. There's only the one that lets you sleep at night knowing you honored the little girl you used to be. Whatever you choose, choose it knowing you are stronger than the moment that tried to break you, and you are never as alone as the lie wants you to believe. The porch light's on, the swing's still moving, and Miss Cammy's right here reading every word you leave in the comments. Until the next story, keep the faith, keep the house in the family, and keep loving loud enough for the magnolias to hear. I'm proud of you for making it to the end. Now tell me, sugar, what would you have done? Much love from 214 Magnolia Circle. Camille Renee Whitmore.